After e4, g6, black is playing the modern defense. We go on with d4 and bishop to g7 now. Knight to c3 developing. Now the two moves we're going to go through are the two most particular moves about the modern defense. It's either d5 or e5. Let's start with e5. This is a mistake actually, although it's quite popular. Now white takes the pawn, and then when the opponent takes back, you develop the knight, comes with an attack on the bishop, and this bishop should not be defended with d6, but rather just go back. Here there's a sequence of forced moves in case black defends the bishop with a pawn. Pawn takes back, take the queen, king takes back, bishop g5 check, and look, position is already evaluated plus 250. Let's make an example. f6, at least our opponent is breathing a bit, it's attacking the bishop, but you go on with castling, check, king moves, and now ignore the bishop being attacked and play knight d5. This knight cannot play a6 to stop the fork knight c7 simply because he will take it. And now white is just completely winning. If instead of this move, let's say after the long castling with check, if black blocks with the bishop, then you have to retreat the bishop to e3. And after knight c6 developing, bishop to c4. Why is the position evaluated plus 4? Well, we're threatening to play bishop to e6, putting pressure and finalizing the attack on this pinned bishop. If black plays h5 with the idea of playing rook to h7 and defend that bishop further, then we're simply going to play rook to d2. You start lifting the rooks. This knight can't really block anything because you can just take, win a pawn, and the attack continues. Rook to h7 by black doesn't work now because you can take the knight. And so obviously, instead of that, what if black plays knight to h6 to save the knight first? Well, then simply rook h to d1 will do the job. Remember that the rook can never go to h7 because then the knight will be hanging, and the knight going to e7 doesn't help because you can play bishop e6. So let's take this from the start and let's see something different. Bishop g7, knight c3. We're looking at the variation with e5. Okay. Take, bishop takes back, knight f3, and now the bishop going back to g7. Okay, bishop to g5 comes with an attack on the queen. Now, what is our opponent going to do here? Obviously, knight f6 cannot be played because e5 simply wins the game. You're going up a piece. h6 as a counterattack doesn't work because you're winning the pawn, you're attacking the bishop as well. So, knight f6 is not a thing. If after bishop g5, black plays knight to e7. Okay, well, knight to d5 finalizes the pressure on this knight, and we're winning. Knight b to c6, you might argue, seems to be defending this knight further. Okay, queen to d2 develop. h6, kicking away this strong bishop. Bishop to f6. And that's it. What can be done now? If the bishop takes, then knight takes back with check. King f8, only move. Queen to c3 should finish the game because we're threatening knight d7 check. You're attacking the rook as well afterwards. So let's, for example, knight g8, threatening as well. But what else? You can't move the rook because you get taken. Knight to g8, but then knight d7 check, and you can take it from there. You're winning this rook. In this position, after bishop f6, what if instead of taking, our opponent just castles? Well, bishop to b5 now is a crucial move. You threaten to just take this knight and then double the attack on the knight in e7. It just cannot be avoided. There's no way out. There's no way out here. Bishop takes, for example. Okay, take back, king to g7, queen to c3 once again. And nothing stops a deadly discovered attack. Let's take it from the start and let's look again at this variation. But we do recap so that we understand the position better and better. e5, take. Bishop takes, knight f3. Bishop goes back. Bishop g5, straight away attacking. What if black blocks with the bishop? Okay, well, take. And after knight takes back, e5. The knight will have to move again. So if the knight goes to g8, then you play bishop to c4. This is completely winning already. Knight to c6, developing. Queen to d2, still developing. Queen e7. These are all best moves, and now long castle. There's no way for black to develop this knight. There's no way to develop this pawn. If this pawn ever pushes, you can take, and then you're threatening to pin the queen to the king. If b6, trying to maybe develop from the fianchetto, well, then in that case, you're able to play this move. Knight d5, attacking the queen, threatening knight c7, queen to d8, queen to f4 now. The idea is to simply take check, knight to c7, and then queen going to f7 will be checkmate. And it's unstoppable. Black's best move according to the agent is king to f8 to avoid the check, But knight c7 remains the strongest move, and we are going to win the rook. So in this position, after playing e5, we just went through knight g8. What about queen e7? Pinning our pawn. Okay, well, queen to e2, I'm pinning it. And now the knight will have to go back to g8 anyway. But we have a difference. Now the difference is that the queen is on e2, and the bishop can't develop naturally. Either way, you're going to play castle. Position is fantastic. Knight to c6. Remember, a move like c6 seems to be stopping the knight from going to d5 or b5. But that allows you to play knight e4, because then c6 leaves a weakness in the square d6. So after knight c6, queen e3, h6 in order to stop knight g5. Well, knight to d5. The queen has to move. Queen to d8, queen to c3. What can be done now? Nothing. If black plays d6, the challenger are strong center, you take. And now you're attacking this rook. So there's nothing. Either take back with the queen or with the pawn, doesn't matter, you're going to take the rook. If instead of d6, our opponent plays knight g2 e7, trying to trade with this unbelievable knight, e6, and again we have an attack on this rook. A move like castle now to save everything doesn't work, because knight f6, and it's a deadly discovered attack on the way. We're going to be playing knight to e8, check, double check, and then checkmate. If instead of castling, our opponent after e6 plays knight takes in d5, finding some compensation. There is no compensation though. You just take this rook with check, and you swap everything, and then you're taking this knight. One last mention is going to be the one with g6. So basically, knight c3, we're looking at the variation with e5, you take. Bishop takes, knight f3, and now bishop goes back. Bishop g5, what if f6? So this is bad, because it weakens the king side. So bishop e3 comes now. And after knight e7 developing, black will never be able to control d5. We've got too many attackers. You play bishop c4, black will never be able to castle either. Let's look at this idea, c6, trying to make more pieces go to d5, but it doesn't work, because queen d2. And now after knight a6, the idea of going to c7 and then be able to push d5, castle long. And now we have enough attackers to that square to make sure that square is ours forever. Knight to c7, doesn't matter, bishop to c5, putting pressure on this knight. d5, okay, well, you just take. That's it. There's no coming back here, because you're going to play rook h to e1. So if knight takes back, for instance, rook h to e1, finalize. I mean, we're attacking this knight. We're going to take that knight and then take in e7. Even if black defends it with the bishop, doesn't matter, you take here. The pawn takes back. Now you take back with the knight, and that's it. Black can't even unpin himself, because then you can just start swapping, and you're winning loads of material. So let's change topic now. After g6, d4, bishop g7, knight c3, d5. This is one of the most popular moves. Here you play e5 to close the game, e6. Okay, now you go on with h4. The idea of simply playing h5. If black plays h5, which is also very popular, in order to stop you from playing h5, and we're going to look at what happens when black doesn't play h5. Bishop to g5 with an attack on the queen, and we exploit the fact that the c-pawn has not been moved to put this queen into a very uncomfortable position. This cannot be blocked with, let's say, I mean, it can be blocked with the pawn, you might argue, but then you just take. Knight takes back, bishop to d3, puts an attack on this square, and this is just too strong. King f7 defending it, but now knight to f3, with threatening knight to e5, this is not going to be stopped. Even if black plays knight to c6, to stop our knight from going to e5, you will still go there anyway. And then we're entering the square g6, it's a devastation. If black takes, you take back, and this knight is pinned, then it's going to lose material. So in this position after bishop g5, what if our opponent plays knight to e7, developing, okay, g4. Just like that. And now let's look at a couple of ideas. If black takes the pawn, then simply take back with the queen. This is completely winning. If black castles, that allows you to play h5. Remember this move, and that's it. This is going to be now inevitable. We're going to checkmate very soon. Queen to e8 to put more defense with this diagonal, but now simply h6. The bishop is lost. If the bishop tries to stay alive by going to h8, then you can just push this pawn with a check. And then the king moves, but then you have this check. So in this position, after queen just takes in g4, black should not castle, because then we can play h5. What if black develops? It plays knight to d7 with the idea of pushing c5. Okay, well, h5. f6. giving more support to f6, trying to counterattack against this very strong bishop that we have. Bishop back to d2. Pawn takes in e5. Is black taking the control of the center? No, because now h6. We're winning a piece. Bishop to f6, saving the bishop. Now we take in e6, a completely winning position. We're threatening knight d5 and then knight f6. It's going to be a disaster. Rook to f8. Rook to f8 seems to be helping, but now simply knight to d5. There's nothing here. Black can't just kick the knight away with c6, because now you will just ignore it and play bishop d3, threatening a deadly check in g6. Position evaluated plus 850 if that doesn't make the point. So in this position, after queen takes taking in g4, what if black goes on with queen to d7? Okay, again, you just play h5, so that's inevitable. Knight to f5 now. The queen is no longer pinned, so knight to f5 is now possible. Castle. Knight to c6, knight to f3. How to continue now? b6, trying to develop from the fianchetto, and castle long side. Bishop to d3. And now it's already impossible for black to just play, let's say, fianchetto, bishop b7, because now you will take in g6. And now our rooks are defending each other, so now we can actually take in g6. And now when the pawn takes back, you take the rook. Bishop takes back, and now you take the knight. And obviously, if the pawn in if the pawn in g takes, then you play queen h5 check, and you're winning this bishop. It's a fork. So after the e pawn takes, queen h4 comes anyway. Comes with an attack on the bishop. And here now, position evaluated plus 6 for a while. What if black castles and defends the bishop like that? Well, then you take the rook, right? So what if instead black just goes back to g7 with the bishop? Here is just pointless because now you're going to play e6. The queen can't take the pawn. You're going to play rook e1. And the game plays itself. So let's take it from the start and let's look at something different. Knight c3, d5. Okay, e5, e6, h4. We're looking at the variation with pawn to h5 by black. Bishop to g5 comes now. And after knight to e7, we said we play g4. What if black doesn't take that pawn, but rather goes on and plays c5? The idea is that the queen can now move freely on the diagonal, and the black is attacking the center in d4. Okay, well, knight to b5 comes now, targeting the weak d6 square. And this is now unstoppable. This attack cannot be avoided. So black going on with development means knight to d6 check, king to f8, queen to f3. To finalize the attack on f7, this should be game over very soon. If black plays f5 to stop the arrival of the queen on f7, you can just take en passant, and this is going to be it. A move like knight takes in d4 now with an attack on the queen doesn't work because you got visions to take the bishop with check, and then you're infiltrating as well. If instead our opponent takes the knight now, goes up material, but then we take this bishop, check, comes with an attack on the rook, so the king has to take, and now check, and the king has to move. Now you take the exchange, king takes back. You're easily winning this game. If instead of taking back, our opponent takes knight to d4, then simply queen to f6, saves the queen from the attack of the knight and prepares checkmate. One last recap. So here, knight c3 and d5, e5. So e6, h4. What if black plays h6? Okay, well, h5 comes anyway, and we're attacking g6. So after g5, f4. We really are going all in the king side. Now, what to do now? If black plays, let's say, knight to d7 to develop. Okay, bishop to d3. Knight to b6 by black with the idea of going to c4. Now we can take this pawn. Pawn takes back. Knight to h3, finalizing the attack over this square g5. And we don't have to worry about f6 defending because the bishop is infiltrating. It's completely winning position. g4 cannot happen because you can take it for free. So after knight to h6, developing, you take in g5, comes with an attack on the queen. Queen to d7, has to move. Queen to f3. And now after castle, queen to g3, we threaten to take this knight for free. King moves to h8, but now queen to f4, finalizing the attack on the knight. And there's no coming back because as soon as the knight moves, you're going to be pushing the pawn. And in this position, earlier we went to knight d7 and knight b6. What if c5? Counter-attacking on the center. Okay, well, take the pawn. d4, and now knight e4, and that's it. So that means that black definitely cannot play c5. The knight is too strong over there. Knight to c6, developing knight to f3. We don't need to go to d6 simply because we can go there anytime we want. Bishop d7 developing, bishop d3. Knight to b4 attacking the bishop. Doesn't matter, you take in g5. This is the best move. Knight taking the bishop, doesn't matter. You take back with the queen. Whenever black takes back, you're going to the square g5. You got knight d6. Position evaluated as if white was up 2 pieces. The last thing I'm going to mention before closing this video is a quick oversight of what happens after knight c3. And here, the variation with e5, as we saw at the beginning of the video, remember you take it. Bishop takes back, knight f3. What if black doesn't defend with d6, which we saw is wrong, but rather defends it with the knight? Okay, well, take, and now you develop like this, b3, and you're going to put the bishop in fianchetto because black doesn't have a dark square bishop anymore. Knight f6, bishop d2, castle, queen d2, d6, and now long castle. Position has been evaluated +3 for a while. Here the idea is to simply play h3 to stop knight g4, and then you can play f4, and the knight will be forced to go back, and then play e5, and that's a completely winning move. You're conquering the d file, the pawn can never take you in e5. So what if black plays bishop to g4 before you get the chance to play h3? Now here you have to play rook e1, and you're going to be able to play h3 next move. And then you carry on with the rook going back to d1, and you can play f4, and so on. And then one last mention, then we're closing this video, is that after knight c3 and d5, e5, what if black gets the bishop out straight away to f5? Now this is bad because you shouldn't be doing this type of move if you've developed the fianchetto already. Now this is something that you want to do when black plays like a defense like this one, the Nimzovich defense, and you play e5, and then black can play this move, bishop f5, to get the bishop out before locking e6. The reason is that black can then play h6 and play the bishop to h7, and the bishop is very well placed. But in this variation, because our opponent committed to fianchettoing the king side, that means that after d5, e5, and bishop f5, you just play knight f4, knight f3, and then you have a plan of playing h3, g4. So let's say black plays e6, h3, and you're going to play g4 and win the bishop, and there's no coming back. There's no way to save this bishop, unless black plays h5. Obviously, that seems to be making sense. Or bishop to e4. So it's not like the bishop is going to get trapped. It's just going to be forcefully traded. So in this position, okay, straight after playing h3, what if black plays bishop e4, knight to g5, and that's it. Best move according to the engine is knight to e7, and now best move is to take the bishop in e4. The pawn can take you back, but then you can take back, and obviously position evaluated as if white was almost up a piece because this center is so strong. Remember, the modern defense is a bad defense. Don't even doubt it. So take, and then you can take it from here. You got bishop pair, you got strong control over the square f6 and d6. So let's go back a couple of moves. Here, after playing h3, what if black plays h5 to put an extra attacker over the square g4? Okay, bishop to g5, the familiar pattern. Queen has to move, queen to d2. c5 now, strike in the center. This loses because bishop to b5 pins the queen to the king, so the only move is to block with the knight to c6, but now you just win a clean pawn in c5. So in this position, we just saw that c5 is a bad move because it allows bishop b5. What if black plays knight to c6, for instance? Okay, well, bishop to b5 comes anyway. And now a6 seems to be kicking the bishop away, but we actually don't care. You're going to take the knight. And after queen takes back, it looks like black is out of every trouble. He can castle, and the king, well, not now, but he can maybe force a swap of bishops and then castle alongside or something. So let's see this scenario, for example. If, okay, now it's white to move, you play rook c1. Let's see this scenario. b5, the idea of playing b4. Here you will just castle, so make developing moves. b4, knight e2. Now you got you got an attack on b4. Okay, a5 to defend the pawn, c3, and we are inevitably going to, we've inevitably just conquered the c file. Position is much better for white. So in this position, we just saw that the plan with b5 doesn't work. What if black tries to castle alongside by forcefully trading with our strong bishop? Well, okay, believe it or not, we do take. And after knight takes in h6, we castle. And that looks like black can finally castle. And this looks like a completely normal position, a normal endgame. But white is much better. You play b3 now. And after, well, look at this position carefully and try to find a move for black. There is nothing that makes sense. So black will have to play knight to g8 with the idea of playing knight to e7 and try to enter the game. But this bishop is the true problem of the black player. White now plays knight a4, which is the reason why we played b3, and we're going to plant the knight in the square c5. Not only that, we're also threatening c4, opening the c file. So if black plays knight e7, you just play knight to c5. If instead our opponent plays f6, with the idea of trading with our very strong central pawn, then you can just play c4. Position evaluated as if white was up more than a piece. This pawn is not a problem in e5 because you can take back with the knight. You're also gonna discover attack on the queen. This is a completely winning endgame to play.